Let's roll. This is Countercharge, your podcast for ranks, flanks, and kings of war. Join your hosts as they delve into the world of Panithor and bring you worldwide coverage of all things Kings of War.
Welcome to Countercharge. I'm Andy Burtis.
I'm Rob Berman.
I'm Rob Fanoff.
And I am Jeremy Duvall. Really excited. We got double the Rob, double the pleasure today. So we're really excited to have Mr. Berman on, the Goblin King, and Andy from Mantic to come on the show to talk all things Kings of War champions. It is a beautiful day in the US. It is a beautiful day in the UK. So I know Rob and I are really excited to have our guests from across the sea join the show. How are you guys doing? Let's start with you, Mr. Berman. I know we had you on to talk about your awesome The Goblin King novel, but what have you been up to hobby-wise?
Well, so hobby-wise, I haven't had a massive amount of time, mainly because Matt at Mantic is keeping me busy in my spare time by doing things like Champions. So, yeah, I haven't sort of done a lot of sort of painting really in the past few months. Unfortunately, I've got into the sort of dark arts of collectible card games, so I've been playing a lot of those recently, and as anyone knows who plays those, it doesn't leave you a lot of spare cash. It's Lorcana. It's really good because we're all a bit Disney mad in this house, so it was quite a good combination of different things. So yeah, I've been playing a lot of that, been playing in some tournaments, and what's interesting is I'm just as bad at Lorcana as I am at other games as well. So there we go. So that's what I've been doing. I've been losing spectacularly in different games now.
So if anything, you're consistent, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Problem, Rob, is that you don't have painting to buff up your score.
I mean, that's what it is. Yeah, it is a bit sad when I can't rely on, because I often would win some sort of painting stuff at these things. So yeah, I can't really paint my cards to make them look prettier. So yeah, I've been not even walking away with participation prizes.
Fun game, though. We played that when it first came out, when the first chapter came out. It's especially good if you got kids or a family that's into Disney stuff. And it's a pretty easy game to learn.
Yeah.
It's a fun one. I've been playing a lot of Star Wars Unlimited myself. But yeah, I go way back with collectible card games. So I understand the frantic desire to always be opening packs.
Yeah, it's weirdly addictive. So I'm just sort of, I need to calm down and get off it for a little bit, and then I can concentrate on other things. But yeah, so that's what I've been doing mostly.
So that sounds like me and Andy are the ones actually playing tabletop games.
Well, we haven't got to my stuff yet, to be fair. So,
So what have you been up to, Andy?
I've been with Mantic I'm trying to work it out now, for about 15 months now, just over 15, almost 16 months. And what I definitely find is when your entire working week is talking miniatures and talking games, you sometimes need something else as a hobby as well, just to kind of switch up a bit. So I do still play miniatures games. I've been playing a lot of Halo. I haven't been painting quite so much, although I have just started recently painting a Champions force up, getting ready for Champions coming. But I've been playing quite a lot of board games with the family. So I'm fortunate enough to have some space at home. So we have a room, that's our board game room with a nice table and the Kallax shelves full of board games and things. So I am still playing board games. I played a little bit of Star Wars Unlimited as well, as you mentioned there, Jeremy, as well, which I quite enjoyed. I used to play Star Wars Destiny when that was a popular thing with the dice and cards.
Yes,
and I really enjoyed that. So this kind of gives me the feeling of those days back a little bit. I haven't been playing it kind of sort of seriously or anything like that, more just quite casually. And I've been playing a lot of video games. It's something I kind of really got out of when I was doing my YouTube stuff. I was really kind of into tabletop stuff, and I didn't really play a lot of video games, but I'm using it more now as a little bit of a change of pace from the day-to-day job, I think. So yeah, so it's kind of been a nice mix of things, but yeah, I mean, I'm sticking with Halo has been the thing I've been playing most for tabletop, purely because I like the idea of not having to paint many models and quick games and small table space. It fits with a lot of the stuff that I've always enjoyed. So,
and from the sense from the outside, and maybe you speak to this from Mantic,
Mhm.
It appears pretty obvious Halo has been a pretty big success for you guys. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ronnie's mentioned this a few times, is we thought it would be big, but the sales and the interest surpassed even what we expected and what we could have hoped for, really. I think recently there's been some kind of, there was a photograph doing the rounds online about the ICV2 stuff. But what was interesting was that was for quarter 4, of which Halo was only on sale for 6 weeks of that quarter, which was quite interesting, which meant that actually we probably could have been quite higher if we'd had a full 3 months worth of sales, because it didn't come out until November. It was interesting that was up there as high as it was. But I think it just shows it's one of those things where I think it's an absolutely solid rule set. Everybody understands the fun of Dead Zone, and it's a very accessible game. It's that bridge between board games and kind of miniatures games that seem to have got a lot of people that maybe weren't that interested in miniatures games before. We just seem to have hit a bit of a different audience with it as well. We're seeing that with the community, and it's not just the typical sort of historical Mantic fans, if you like. We're starting to see a lot of new faces and a lot of new names coming kind of across the forums and the emails and stuff.
And I think you can see that in a lot of the events for Halo at Adepticon, which is just around the corner, are full.
Yeah.
So that's good.
It was great to see them fill up, and it's still early days. I mean, with the second wave of stuff with the points values and stuff's coming the end of March, so we'll start to see it kind of grow a little bit beyond that with the first opportunity to add different sort of miniatures into your lineups. The future's bright. At the minute I'm busy making the video for the next wave of stuff which is coming up, which people won't see until probably June time. They're looking absolutely fantastic. So yeah, exciting times.
And any updates on Epic Warpath, when that's looking like that's going to be coming out?
Yeah, it's not a project that I'm heavily involved in. It's something that the other members in the team, so I can't really give you any dates because I'd be guessing if I'm perfectly honest. I think somebody put a picture up on Facebook this last few days where they'd been into the Mantic HQ, and there's some of the painted stuff up in the cabinets and things now.
Looking fantastic.
They're starting to kind of rear their head. It's starting to come together. But as far as I understand, I was in a meeting last week where it was chatted about, and everything's on track. Everything's kind of coming as it should be, and it's looking fantastic.
And then 4th edition starting to get worked on in the wings. I know people are starting to get excited about that. Another great opportunity to have Alessio back, right? How's that been, having Alessio back helping out the studio?
He's a kind of a bottomless pit of information, and he's kind of seen it more times than we can imagine. So that there's a lot of experience in there when Alessio is around, and it's also interesting for Alessio to almost circle back on Kings of War after being away from it for a little while and see how it's changed and evolved from the kind of that first and second editions that he was involved with. So it's been interesting. He's looking at that basically along with Kyle and some of the other team to kind of take that Kings of War on into the future when that arrives.
Well, what about you, Rob? I know you were on a hardcore hobby throwdown to get ready for BCB. Are you kind of taking a break now, or what's going on?
Well, I got to get ready for Adepticon, but you're right. We started in mid-December, and it was like every day right up until March 1st when we unveiled the army at Blue City, which we stumbled into winning the event. Whole lot of coverage coming. We got blogs coming out detailing how we sculpted the bases, and there's a lot more to go. For Adepticon, I've got an Armada fleet to paint. I've got additional units to paint, so there is no rest for the wicked. So I don't have time for these card games you guys talk about. You know, some of us have to play tabletop.
Well, and then you got to research action figures, right? So that's
okay.
All
right. Yeah, yeah. They just had New York Toy Fair, so there's that as well. So
you got to stay up to date.
Really looking forward to Adepticon. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Looks like we have 53 players for Adepticlash, which is a significant increase over past years. Armada only has 12 players, so there's a few events that maybe are a little bit smaller than last year. But I think it's part of the community feeling its way out with the new venue and the new schedule, and it's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to Adepticon.
Yeah, I was talking with Adam yesterday. One of the things he's doing, which I think is a great idea for prize support, is that there's going to be tickets to other people's events.
Correct.
As prize support. So I think that's pretty cool. So I donated a couple entry fees for Best of the Rest.
Oh, we've got a ticket in there for Kings of Memphis, which is happening on June 21st.
Which I think that's like a cool idea for prize support, is you give tickets to other people's tournaments as part of your sort of swag.
I just hope somebody that wasn't already planning to come gets it.
Yeah. They're on the fence of going, right? They kind of maybe want to go.
Once you go to that event, you see how cool they are. I mean, Blue City is a good example. Once you go to it, you're like, oh my gosh, this is just insane to 11. You got to make that first step, and you've got to go to those events and actually see them in person. So,
yeah, you get hooked on the event. Yeah. Well, things are pretty busy for us. We had the Riddle of Steel a couple weeks ago, which was our Conan themed tournament at Scott's house, and Scott won that. Congratulations to him.
Scott won his own event?
He did.
Some home cooking going on there?
And then he needed one more score to qualify for Masters, so he flew up to Rose City Rumble in Portland and won that event too. So he had back-to-back wins
I thought he was a hobby guy.
Well, he is a hobby guy, but he flies under the radar sometimes when it comes to how good a player he is. He'll be at Masters, so, who knows what he has in store for that as far as what hobby he's going to bring. He is a hobby mastermind.
I'm actually bringing goblins to Adepticon Clash.
That's what I like to hear.
Yeah, Rob just went from 6 to midnight once he heard Goblin.
So I'm having Kyle Poole write the list. I just took pictures of the army. Here's what I've got. I have no delusions of grandeur.
And Adam's done a really good job growing that tournament again from last year where we were in the 30s. We're now in the 50s. And at the very high point, we were in the low 60s. Now that we're getting close to 60 again, I think putting Adam and the Omaha boys to help promote the Clash is a great idea. I'm really looking forward to the pairings tournament, Rob, which should be interesting. Usually they have their team tournament, which Rob and I have had a lot of fun playing together in, but now it's going to be each round you play with a different person. So that should be pretty fun.
What are you playing in the pairings event?
I'm taking Northern Alliance, which is the army that I'm working on. I'm going to be borrowing some units from Felix to make sure I'm there. But I am making progress, as you've seen pictures of. My ice elementals are coming along pretty great. The army itself, I'm really happy with where it's at. For my ice elementals, I'm doing like James Wapple did a video on painting Mantic ice elementals with oil paints, of doing like a super kind of non-metallic, high reflective look. So that's what I'm doing. And I did the first one, which took me forever. But now that I'm on my second one, it's going way faster.
You know what, though? If you would have used oil paints, it would have been fast.
Yeah, and I know that's sort of like the hipster cool thing to do is like, I use oil paints. I'm such a great artiste. Something about me just doesn't want to, like, it wants this. It's like the old curmudgeon in me.
It's a whole new skill set you got to learn.
And I just don't know if I have the bandwidth at this moment.
I'm bringing Forces of the Abyss for the pairings event, so should be fun.
Cool. You'll have Goblins for the main and then Forces of the Abyss for the team.
That is correct.
Nice,
yeah.
nice. Still working on US Masters, where we almost got all our prize support done as far as trophies. We'll be doing a preview to the community about what the prize support will be, along with we have another Masters Minute coming out soon that's going to be highlighting how to sign up for Best of the Rest, and then also talking about some of the great food options in Reno. But that process is coming along really great. So we're, still a few more months, but people's seasons are starting to wrap up, right, Rob? We should see usually Lone Wolf in April. That kind of marks the end of the South season. It marks the end of our season.
Southeast is done as of Blue City Brawl. So
yeah, so we'll start seeing people's teams, and I think then we'll get a sense on who's going to be coming to Best of the Rest and who's going to be coming to Masters main event. But we're having a really great time getting that. We're getting all our train together. Matt Carmack's going to be coming in from Texas. Him and I are going to be doing the streaming. So we're getting all the infrastructure set up for that, which is going to be pretty fun. Spoiler, we're going to be hoping to be doing Friday night from the Masters, which will be an extra stream we're doing this year, which will be sort of a la a red carpet as people are coming in, signing up, getting their player packet. We're going to be bringing people over to the stream, checking in with people. We'll be talking lists and matchups, doing a little breakdown on how we think who's going to do what. So it's going to be a really fun stream to get into on that Friday night while you're hobbying or whatever. You want to see what's going on at the US Masters. We'll be doing interviews, all sorts of cool stuff Friday night from the Masters. So stay tuned for that. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and on the other side, we'll come back and start talking Kings of War champions. We'll be right back.
This is Shannon Shoemaker, the ex-Kings of War player, and you're listening to Countercharge.
Welcome back to Countercharge, and we're going to get into Kings of War champions. And Rob, why don't you start off with, where did this idea come from?
Since I left Mantic, I'd been sort of working on some other stuff, but smaller game ideas. And then about a year ago, I got summoned to Ronnie's office. Him and Matt were in there, to come in on one of my days off. And he was like, okay, we like what you've been doing, but we sort of maybe want you to pivot to do something else. So I guess Matt and Ronnie had seen how well Ambush had doing and that there was an appetite for sort of smaller sizes, smaller game sizes of Kings of War. Originally, the sort of idea was, can you kind of take a look at Ambush and come up with something along those lines that would be a great intro for people that are interested in rank and flank games, but you may not have the time, may not have all the models and that sort of stuff. So that was where the idea came from originally, actually. It's got this idea that, to make a rank and flank game that uses troops, that still has, units on multi-basing and all things like that, but kind of shrink it down so it plays faster. It's a lot more streamlined in terms of rules. So it's kind of like really that sort of great intro game to Kings of War. It was kind of rip up the rules and kind of do what you want with it, really. So that was how it started. And I think for me, it was a chance to, I've got two young boys. It was a chance to make the kind of rank and flank game that would kind of catch their attention and make them want to play. So if you've never played a rank and flank game, this is a great way into it. So yeah, that was how sort of Champion started. And the big thing was to make it so that the heroes or the champions played like a really kind of big part of it. Not only, with a lot of lore, so there's a lot of narrative here. Each sort of champion has their own background and why they're fighting. It was then that these champions would sort of affect how your army would play. I guess the idea is you kind of fall in love with these different heroes. You love how they look. Obviously the Goblin one's amazing. And then based on that, you then go and actually want to play, Kings of War champions. That was the idea. You sort of fall in love with the heroes and then want to go from there. So yeah, that was kind of the basis. And then I think this whole idea of making it fast, making it really easy to get into, then dictated a lot of the rest of the game. So, for example, it's played on a really smaller area than even Ambush. It's played in, the playing areas 42 inches by 24 inches. And that idea was that, we want to get it on people's dining room tables. Particularly in the UK, we don't have a lot of space. So for me, it was I wanted to be able to get out a game that I could play on the dining room table at night with the kids. Things like terrain, we don't want it to be a lot of terrain. So actually you get cardboard terrain in the set and all this sort of stuff was like really important, so you've got a chance to kind of start out with rank and flank gaming and get going. So that was how it started really. And that sort of dictated a lot of the rules as well.
It's interesting, Rob, in what you're talking about, this idea of like the vision mission of a game guiding the actual design, as opposed to designing the game first and then figuring out where it fits into the overall umbrella. So it really sounds like that was like a core spot you began with, because I think in many ways, and I know there's a lot of people who love Vanguard, right? But in many ways, that is sort of the entry level game into Kings. I don't know if that ever manifested fully. Whereas a lot of people love Ambush, right? Where I've seen slow grow leagues or stores getting into Kings of War, that's usually where they start, right? Everyone get an Ambush box. So that's interesting of starting with, it sounds like what you're saying is you started with, well, what is the vision? What is the mission for the game? And then that sort of led into the actual game design.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was sort of like, the brief from Ronnie and Matt was sort of take Ambush, I guess, and maybe even, reduce it down from there. They want a game that is great for someone that's always been curious because, we're all big Kings of War players. There's nothing quite like that spectacle of lining up, 2,000, whatever, how many points alongside each other and then sort of absolutely going at it and hammering each other. But for some people, that's a really intimidating thing, not only for obviously the amount of models you need, it's learning all the rules for all those miniatures, then obviously choosing what you want for your army list. So it's like, okay, well, let's take away some of those frustrations that have been, that people have had in the past, and then sort of make a game so they can still have that experience of having the rank and flank, going for the rear charges, going for the side charges, but there isn't that sort of, I guess, nervousness about how many models they're going to have to paint. So, for example, with champions, you're talking around 20 to 30 models for each kind of company, as they're called, rather than sort of, hundreds and hundreds for Kings of War. And it's interesting, Jeremy, you mentioned Vanguard. I think in hindsight, 'cause obviously, I was there when we launched Vanguard, sort of pitching it as the intro to Kings of War wasn't quite there. I think for me, this is the intro to rank and flank. But if you want, you don't necessarily even have to make that move up to Kings of War. You can absolutely sit and just keep on playing champions because the gameplay is so quick and it is quite tight. So if you like this and the way it plays, and actually you could just play this and never make the move. Or, once you've got these heroes and you've got the units, you could sort of use this as a basis for your Kings of War army as well.
And I think, Andy, like if you look at the overall sort of milieu or landscape of miniature games, I feel really in the last 5 to 10 years, the skirmish game or the small miniatures game, that's really in many ways outside of sort of maybe some of the bigger army games, that's really taken the industry by storm. So I know when I'm trying to get people in the Kings of War back, if I get concerns, it's always around, oh my God, how many models do I have to
Yeah.
paint, right? Is that or something you kind of in your day-to-day you run up against too sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's maybe kind of two sides to it. What one is that people who are already invested in miniature games have maybe already spent big sums of money, don't want to get into another big scale game, maybe love the look of it, really interested in it, but it's another commitment. And then on the flip side of that, miniature gaming and board gaming and tabletop gaming is having a boon, and there's more people have got eyes on it now, and they see these big battles as just a like Kings of War might be just a step too far for your first entry into kind of tabletop gaming. Like, where do I start? Not only do I have to learn how to play a game, I need to learn how to be a list builder. I need to learn how to be a hobbyist. I need to learn how to be a painter. I need to learn how to be a general on the tabletop. So sometimes games are just a step too far. And I think Kings of War isn't the most difficult game to play in the world, but it has lots of layers if you're brand new to it. And I think that a bit of a kind of like a bit of a tagline for me, really, with Kings of War Champions is really, if you've always wanted to play a rank and flank game, but there have been reasons that you've been put off in the past, Kings of War Champions solves all of those kind of reasons why you never wanted to kind of get involved. So it's a lot less models to build and paint. There's no list building. So when you buy a Kings of War company, like if you buy the champion, the hero, and his company, what you get in the box is what you put on the tabletop. You're not like hesitant about building it the wrong way or building it a way that might not be optimal. The list is basically what comes in the box. So you can start building it without having to learn the rules first to understand how list building works. It's a manageable kind of project. If you think that maybe the lore and the background is something that you want to get into, but maybe the full scale Kings of War is, where do I start? Like, it's been around for a while, I'm not really sure. Kings of War Champions has lore and background in the rule book about all of the different champions. Each of the champions and the units that come with them are all now named units in the game. The narrative side of it is there into it as well. So there's a real fleshed out story about who these champions are, why they're there, why they're all fighting. It's more of a kind of a collectible experience in terms of the idea isn't necessarily to expand your army. The idea is, if you like this game and you're getting into it and you want to continue with that journey, you pick up a different champion and you play a different champion in their company. And each of the different champions and the companies play differently by design and by they have like kind of faction orders. There are 3 different orders that your champion can give to their units on the battlefield, and you allocate those by putting upside down tokens onto the 3 units that you choose. And your opponent will do the same, and their champion will have different abilities that they're kind of dealing out different orders. And then at the start of the round, you flip them over, and then at that point, everybody knows what everybody's got, kind of thing. And it's a way to give different flavor and different abilities to the different companies.
A lot of other games in this space do the same thing, right? Where it's you buy the box,
yeah,
that's your army for the game.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna do Basalia or whatever, I would get the Basalia Champions box, which would come with the champion battalion. Is that what you called it?
Company.
It would have everything that I need. If I want something new, like you said, I could pick up the dwarf champion box, or I could pick up something else.
Yeah.
But everything that I need to play as far as what models I need will be in that box.
That's right. In a company box, you will have the champion. You will have the units that come with it. So all of those models, you'll have all of the bases will be in there. The instructions on how to build the models so that new people can absolutely understand exactly how these things go together. There'll be unit cards for each of the different units in the champion. So all of the stats and all of their abilities, their keywords are all on cards right in front of you. So you don't have to flip into the rule book to look to see what the different stats are, their movement, sort of how they fight or whatever. And also on those stat cards as well is something that we've learned from other games, is that the keywords and explanation of what the keyword means is on the card as well. So it's not, so even in your first games, it's not a case of, right, that's a keyword there. What does inspiring mean? For example, I have to go to the rule book and look up that word. It tells you on the card as well. This is designed that you buy that box, everything is in it to play. The cards and the rules are right there in front of you, and you're up and running in no time.
This game sounds awesome. But the question I always have is, how do you guys have time to do a new game? You have so many games out there. Just talk to me about how difficult it is to juggle limited resources and feel like you're supporting all these different games and still have time to innovate and come out with new product.
It's definitely a case of spinning plates and allocating resources and making sure that we're working on the right things at the right time. You can't manage everything at once, but there is an element of, we want Kings of War to be the go-to rank and flank game that everybody plays. We think it's a fantastic game, and we know that the people that play it love that game. But there's a difficulty to get into it. And we see Champions as bringing people into the world of Panethor, into the world of rank and flank gaming. Like, I honestly believe that Kings of War Champions is the best, sort of the most accessible rank and flank game that there's ever been. I don't think there's an easier entry point into rank and flank gaming than this. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, if we think the time is right, and if we think that sort of there's a gap in the market for something, then we'll shuffle those resources and we'll put them into the right place.
Ambush is a great intro to ranks and flanks, whereas Vanguard was a great intro to Panethor. Maybe give me a sense of, mechanically, how is this going to push people, or at least inform people on ranks and flanks?
It's all multi-bases. There's no individual bases at all. You get your multi-base in the box. So that's a huge thing. You know, that is one of Kings of War's really unique elements, is that you've got this opportunity, not only from a gameplay point of view, to do something that is super simple, you know, putting everything on the base, but from a hobby point of view is fantastic, because you can do all these little mini dioramas and things like that. With that in mind, the unit cards, like Andy's mentioned, actually have these dimensions on there for the multi-base. There's no sort of like large infantry, large cavalry, all that sort of stuff. It's just literally, you know, these are your Basileans, this is the size for the men-at-arms, and that's it. You know, you just put them all on that base and off you go. And I think that's important as well, to sort of really sort of embrace, because I think in the past, it always struck me that it's a little bit odd to supply the individual bases, because, you know, most people are just putting them down onto a multi-base. And we always talked about that when I was at Mantic, you know, let's get rid of the single bases and just supply multi-bases. So this is a really good opportunity to sort of, right from the get-go, is when you open that box, you're like, right, there's these huge bases in there. I'm going to put everything down on this one. And you can even, you know, while maybe you're building the models or something like that, is practice with those bases. You know what they are. You can write them down and say, okay, well, I'm going to practice with these. Mechanically, it's straight away is saying, these are the big bases. This is how you play.
And it sounds like there may be overlap with the contents of a Champions box and the contents of an Ambush box. So I'm curious, Andy, is the intent that Kings of War Champions would replace the Ambush boxes, or are they going to both be available?
No, they're both going to be available. We see kind of Champions is a game that can be standalone. As Rob mentioned before, there will be some people who pick up Champions and then never ever go anywhere else. They just keep buying different Champions boxes. They see it as a collectible thing. I want a different company. I want to kind of play with those. So Champions can and sort of lives as its own standalone game. Ambush is still very much another entry point into Kings of War, but you still need to kind of have an understanding of list building. There's an element of kind of almost building that first small force with one eye on kind of expanding it into the future. So Ambush is still very much a part of Kings of War. There's no reason why, if you start with Champions and you've been playing it for a while and you want to, you fell in love with one of your particular kind of heroes and you want to see their story continue and you want to build out that army, you can absolutely then transport your Champions force forward into Kings of War and start with smaller Ambush games and work your way up into kind of full 2,500 points or whatever.
Really interesting here, because as you guys are talking, I'm thinking, okay, you got Kings of War Champions. Rob, as you said, you don't have all the different base sizes. This is your unit. You could then move into Ambush, where now you do have some more flexibility and you can build units with the obvious restrictions over Kings of War. And if you continue to like that, you can go even bigger into Kings of War.
Yeah.
Almost like you have a linear progression to Kings of War through several game systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, Kings of War is a great game to aspire to, but getting into it is, like Andy's been saying earlier on, is quite tricky. Even if you've got the 2-player set, there's still a lot of models to put together and actually get going.
Just don't play goblins and you're fine, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I always joke that I can remember doing 120 goblins, for full model count, and that was 3 units of rabble, which are worth, like 500 points, something like that. It's crazy, really, when you think about it. The whole idea for Champions was just to take out some of those frustrations and make it even easier to get into. Even things like Andy's been saying about list building. You can often get that analysis paralysis where you'll buy stuff, or you might not buy something because you're like, oh, I don't know whether a Mincer Mob is going to be the unit for me. Will it work? So you can get that sort of hesitation almost. So the idea for this one is, well, you don't have to worry about that. You can get the box. You can sort of look at the general playstyles and go, okay, well, Twilight Kin, they look pretty fast. I like that idea. I love the models. You can sort of buy one based on loving the models, and then it's not too onerous when you've only had to paint 20 or 30 models. And then you can go, yeah, I like these. These are cool. Okay, actually, I'd like to try something a bit more defensive. Well, the Basileans, let's try that. Hopefully, even in the rules as well, there's just a lot of ways in here for people just to have fun with it. For me, this was just to have a really fun game, and all the playtesting has shown that people come away and play it, and they had a great, they've had a great time with it, which is brilliant, which is really rewarding.
And one thing that you talk about that I think is so true, which is if there's one element of Kings of War outside of its a minute to learn, lifetime to master, that's bespoke and individual to Kings of War, is multi-basing. No other game does it like Kings of War does. And you see a lot of other game systems that are similar. I've seen people start to multi-base in after what they see Kings of War can do. So I love, as far as when you think about like what's the vision, mission, values of this game that we're designing, just staying true to that multi-based idea. Was that something just right off the bat, Rob? You were like, I want to have multi-basing. Was that something that you just knew right away?
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of totally embracing it and showing this is an immediate, unique point of difference, to all the other games out there. And it does help to make it feel, obviously, it kind of is a skirmish game in some ways. It's a skirmish game with just very big, footprint.
Yeah, your pieces are big, right? You have 12 drops in an army, so you have 12 models. It's just the models are like a bunch of dudes.
So you take, for example, like the goblins in this, it's 4 or 5 units. And that's like a skirmish game, but it's just obviously a lot of models. So yeah, I think having that multi-base was a really important thing. And also it does then go into the rank and flank element. You still do want that tactical of pivoting the bases, of going for the side charges. Although there are some key differences between the rules in this and Kings of War. If you played Champions and then went on to Ambush or Kings of War full, you've got the basics. You know how to move a multi-base unit. You know how to charge into someone and all that sort of stuff. So you've got the cores down. It's then kind of what do you want to do with it after that?
Sometimes if someone's never played rank and flank, when I'm teaching them Kings of War, they just don't have that idea of what does it mean to deny a flank or give up a flank, or so it's good to sort of not only start small model wise, but also gameplay wise, core elements of what it's like to play a rank and flank game. Those are good to start off small and try to teach people those too. So not only is it in an entry into sort of the universe of ranks and flanks model wise, but it sounds like you're also wanting to help people learn the game elements of what it's like to play a rank and flank game.
Totally. And also, not only is it just about how you move around the table, there are sort of rules changes to make it a bit more dynamic, because obviously in Kings of War with all the big units, if you sort of get locked into combat, it's not too bad because you may have another 10 units. Obviously for this one, you've only got a small amount of units. So we wanted to make sure, you can get in and out of combat quite quickly. It's a bit more fluid, because if you've only got 5 units on the table, if 2 of them are locked into combat for the whole of the game, it can be quite boring. Wavering, for example, isn't a thing in Champions, because we were like, actually, this was slowing the game down. You were just getting stuck in combat. Units are either fighting or they're dead. And I think as well, that's a good introduction for people who haven't played a rank and flank game, because they might get a bit confused. What's wavering? Why are they not able to do anything? Elements like that have sort of been taken out to make it a lot faster, to make it a bit more dynamic, and also a bit more, exciting. And you've got those kind of Hollywood moments where the champions can charge in and destroy a unit and that sort of thing.
Is there a set amount of Kings of War champion boxes we're going to have with release, with maybe more to come in the future? Or could you speak a little bit about when the game is actually released? What factions are we going to be able to get boxes for?
Yes, it's going to go for pre-order soon, and then it'll release at the end of April is when everyone will be able to get it into their hands. And to start it off on launch day, if you like, on day one, there will be a 2-player starter set. So that's called Faith and Fury. And inside that 2-player starter set, we will have Basileans and we'll have Forces of the Abyss. So the Basilean champion is Alanus Illustris.
The classic matchup.
That's it, yeah. And then the Bloody Cardinal is the Force of the Abyss champion. And in that 2-player box, you will have both of those 2 forces. The Basileans have the new plastic cavalry. You will have the rule book. You'll have some tokens, some punch-out tokens in there. If anybody's familiar with Vanguard and the amount of tokens that we used to use in that, don't be put off by the fact we've got tokens in this. There are more things like scenario markers, and we've even got like little sort of template things, so marking the edge of a base before you move it, and that kind of thing to help people out. So there's some punch out tokens in there. There is some punch out terrain in there as well. So there's terrain for the board that comes as cardboard. So especially when you're starting your first games and things like that, it's a perfect way to get playing. There is all of the stat cards that are in there as well. The rule book has all of the rules in there, and it also has all of the background lore and information as well. So there's lots of stuff in that rule book. So the 2-player starter set is a fantastic way to kind of get started. If this is up your street and that's what you want to do, then that's the way to kind of dive in. Also available at launch, we've got 2 other Kings of War Champions companies as well. So if, for example, if they're not your taste, if you're not a Force of the Abyss player or a Basilean player, we also have Jordan Tallinson company box, and he is the dwarf champion that comes from Northern Alliance. So in there, you'll get the models that you need, all of the bases, the stat cards that you need. There's also a Lathiel Voidheart, which is the Twilight Kin, which is another standalone box as well. So if, for example, the Basileans or the Force of the Abyss are not for you and you want to just jump in with one particular sort of company and dip your toe in, you can absolutely do that. So on launch, there will be 4 different factions to start with. We'll also have separately, so if you don't buy the 2-player starter set, you'll still want a rule book maybe. So there's a rule book and a token set that you can buy as a purchase, standalone purchase. And then we've also got a deluxe 3D terrain set as well. So the terrain that comes in the starter box is punch out card. We are also selling a standalone deluxe 3D terrain set that replaces the exact same terrain that's in that punch out tokens. So you could still use the tokens on the board, put the 3D terrain on top of it, and then when you get into battle and the terrain's getting a little bit in the way, just take the 3D stuff away and leave the 2D stuff in its place. And we also have a fantastic deluxe neoprene double-sided gaming mat as well. So one side is kind of like forestry, kind of Greenland. The other side is a bit of like a snow and ice base.
And that fits the actual size of the game, right? Which you said was 42 by 12?
42 by 24.
By 24, yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that Champions mat is the exact right size. I forgot to mention actually as well, in the Faith and Fury 2-player set, there's a paper mat as well. If you're sort of starting from scratch, there is a kind of a paper mat. I might be speaking out of turn here, but I think it's 2-sided as well, actually. So that's everything that comes out at launch. That's out on day 1. So that's a great way to start, 2-player set or another couple of different factions. So if you're in a little group, you can all kind of get different factions and people playing different things. And then the plan is every month after that, for the rest of this year, we're going to be releasing another company box.
So cool.
In fact, I'll give you a little bit of an exclusive.
Hot off the wire.
So we haven't told anybody else this one yet. So the plan at the minute, and things do change, but the plan is, as it is now, is in May we will be releasing Grunk Blackclaw, who is the Goblins. Yes, and it's a fantastic model as well, I have to say. Speaking of models and stuff as well, so all of the champions are brand new sculpts.
I was wondering that, Andy, because I was like, well, maybe you're just going to reuse some of the Vanguard stuff.
If you thought they were awesome, wait until you see these models. I will go on record as to say the champion sculpts for the main champions are the best sculpts and the best miniatures we have ever made. They are absolutely unbelievable.
Are they resin?
They are resin, but they're a new product. So it's not resin like you've ever kind of experienced before. They're much more durable. They're really, really crisp. It's not like a brittle resin. It's not something that we've this is not something we've made in-house. This is something else that we're having produced for us. And you'll start to see this material coming through more in the future and into other stuff as well. It's an absolute game changer in terms of quality. The sculpts have got so much character in them. And these models will be available into Kings of War as well in the future. I can't wait for people to actually start to see them. I know at the minute, nobody's really I mean, it might do by the time this goes live to everybody. You might have started to see some of the actual painted models. But so far, I think all of people have really seen is artwork. But the miniatures really do reflect the character in that artwork.
So I was involved in like coming up with the concepts as well for all the miniatures. And again, you're talking about making it like a whole product. Like the lore runs through everything. So even in like the miniatures, when they were being sent off to get concept artwork, the concept artist was sent all the background for each character as well, so they could try and tie that in. So it's in their pose, so they're really dynamic or that sort of thing. And that was really exciting actually to sort of see these characters, which I'd just written the background for, come to life. And I definitely think that's helped, dictate even things like the pose and just little bits. I mean, the Goblin one, for example, is 100% my favorite Goblin model ever. That's a big thing to say, but I love it. And I think people will sort of fall in love with these champions, and then that will dictate which faction they end up doing.
So you mentioned, Rob, what's in the box is what's in the box. That's the faction.
Mm.
And you mentioned each faction plays differently. Can you riff on that? Were you trying to think about, when you were designing the different factions, staying true to that faction's lore, but also maybe in your head, I want this faction to be more elite, or this faction is going to be a little bit more quick? Or could you talk a little bit about the game elements and sort of how they manifested into these different companies?
That's a really good question, actually, because you want them to obviously play differently. You want some of them to be fast, you want some of them to be a bit stronger. Although I sort of used Kings of War as it is at the minute as sort of like a base, this was like, okay, because a lot of that is already balanced, they've got this many attacks and what have you. There was a sort of like a lot of back and forth between, how many attacks should they have? Although they're all troops, they've normally got the attacks slightly under the attacks of a regiment. And the reason for that was so, there's nothing quite like that dopamine hit of rolling loads of dice when you've got a flank or something like that. So we still wanted it to be that, you're still rolling lots of dice, but then they've sort of been tweaked by, most of them have got slightly higher nerve as well than a normal troop. I think then that is the regiments as well. In terms of like actually how they play differently, we can then experiment with giving them different rules, different special abilities, which are all on the cards, as Andy has said. But then also you've got these faction orders. So there's 3 faction orders for each one, and that's where a lot of the flavor comes from, because it might make, let's say, the Northern Alliance, you might get an extra attack from like a wild animal that kind of comes along with the Northern Alliance. Whereas something like the Goblins, they might be able to run away as part of their faction orders. It's like a bit like a cake, I guess. The bottom layer is just the units themselves, and they've got a bit of flavor. And then sort of on top of that, you've got the icing, which is the faction orders. So that each one's got 3 faction orders. And then on top of that, just for the sprinkles, the champions all typically have some sort of like aura, and that will affect them differently as well. So it might give them the equivalent of brutal, or it might increase their nerve and that sort of thing as well. So I think what you could potentially do in the future is, as these champions gain more experience, or maybe, in campaigns, they might lose experience as well. You could potentially update them and their aura becomes a bit different to reflect that character changing as well. So I think that's a really exciting thing to do as well, that we can sort of evolve it over time, and the champions might change as well. And with that, the actual gameplay will change a bit.
And you mentioned like objectives. Is there still sort of at the heart of Champions, are you still playing scenarios? Are you just trying to kill each other? Is there take and hold? Luke, can you riff a little bit on the actual gameplay in regards to maybe some of the scenarios someone might see in Champions?
Yeah, there's 6 scenarios in the rulebook, and they are different, like capture this objective. Some of them might be capture this area. So again, it's kind of looking at Kings of War, and also I must admit, looking at games like Firefight and Dead Zone and saying, okay, well, what sort of missions work on those games as well, and then sort of translating it too. There's a really varied mix, and actually a couple of them are like meant to be like narrative ones. So one of them, you might be the attacker, and then because the games are so quick, I mean, bear in mind, we've done some playtest days and people are learning to play in the first game. By sort of games 2 and 3, they're all lasting between like 45 minutes to an hour. So it really, for me, hits that sweet spot of, I haven't got a lot of time. Ideally, I want a game to last about an hour. I honestly think Champions, once you know the rules, you can rattle through these games really quick, which is great. For me, that's perfect. So yeah, the objectives, the scenarios do see you doing different things, which is quite cool.
You mentioned playtesting there, and I'm just curious. When I think about narrative and balanced gameplay, sometimes gamers think those are at the different ends of the slider, right? Like the more narrative you go, the less balance, or the more balance you go, the less narrative. When you guys were testing, I know obviously you were trying to go for that narrative special sauce, but were you also thinking about making sure that factions felt sort of equal when they went up to each other? Or can you take us a little bit through how that evolved during the playtest process?
In some ways, it makes it easier and it makes it slightly harder that the box contents are fixed, that everyone is coming to the table with the same lists. In some ways, we did do lots of matchups between different factions to see how they felt, and we had a few playtest days at Mantic where at the end of each day I'd be writing loads of notes and things like that. And like, say, for example, Alessio played it quite a lot, actually, and he was really useful because he was giving feedback and saying, yeah, these ones feel a little bit weaker, maybe these are a bit overpowered. So yes, it is narrative, and there are some rules in there which do spike. They do some slightly unusual things for the characters. I think generally, if you're playing Basileans, you go up against Goblins, they're still going to feel pretty equally matched because of the choice of units that we've put in there, but also because we can, I guess, pull levers like giving them different special rules or tweaking it slightly to make sure that it is a bit more balanced. When people are playing, they should see that each faction can beat, you can beat another faction. It's not rock, paper, scissors. They all can kind of stand on their own 2 feet and beat each other.
We found, especially at the local scene, running a league or running a small one-day tournament is less around the competition per se, but it helps people get organized, helps players get focused. They have an event to plan towards, right? Like, oh, I got a tournament coming up next week. I got to make sure I get my stuff painted or whatever. Like, looking at champions and organized play, do you see that as part of this game as being a great fit for either small tournaments or league type play?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think anything that gets people playing the game can never be a bad thing. And I think Champions, because it's less of a commitment in terms of hobby time, it's less of a commitment because you haven't got to worry about the list building, and you're not worried about, well, this person's been playing games for years, they're going to build a better list than I will. I'm going to go here and get my butt kicked kind of thing. For getting new people in and playing in an organized play way, I think Champions fits the bill sort of fantastically. It's not designed to be uber competitive tournament gaming, but it definitely leans itself into an organized play kind of way of getting people games in. And especially over time as more and more factions come out and people, like next month, the Goblins come out, for example. Well, let's, some people are going to take Goblins, people are going to want the new faction. And it's more that kind of collectible thing over time of, or something new's coming out next month. It's not a massive outlay in terms of financial commitment. It's not a big outlay in terms of hobby time I have to sink into it. And it just becomes kind of a nice little project, really, and leans into that organised play.
Say there's a weekend tournament. It's a great Friday night game.
Yeah.
You can play it while having a few beers because it's not as taxing. You're not having to think so much about all the different units and all the different rules. You can sort of relax into it and have a bit more fun. As far as I'm concerned, that if you're at a big Kings of War tournament on the Friday night, you kind of warm up by having a game of Champions.
We used to think that Ambush kind of fit that role. But what I find is I don't want to play Ambush. I'll just play Kings of War. Unfortunately, they're so close in similarity that if you're at an event, I'm not going to play Ambush and then play Kings of War because it's sort of the same thing. But it sounds like there's enough novel mechanics, right? Yeah. And the fact that your lists are set, it will fit this role. And, maybe Rob and Andy, maybe you guys want to share with us your favorite champions that you've played so far?
Obviously, I have to say Goblins, but I've always wanted to play Halflings, because basically they're human goblins, right? So I've always been interested in Halflings. Again, I've always been sort of put off because it's such a lot of models. But I think for me, do you know what? That's really hard. I really like the Halfling champion. I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, Andy, about what they're doing.
Go for it. Why not?
Yeah, so that's Taran Bly, who's this sort of hapless inventor, basically. And he's pretty much riding into battle this like death machine that he's kind of built. He's sort of inspired by the behemoth and that sort of thing. And he wants to create his own sort of war engine. So he's sort of done this. Unfortunately, he's not very good. He reminds me a lot of, the dad in Gremlins. He's trying to do all these inventions, but they don't go right. Oh, I don't know. Is he my favorite? I mean, obviously it's the Goblins. Let's say that it's a toss-up between that or the Trident Realm champion. No, I can't. They're all my favorites. It's like
which one's my favorite child?
Favorite son, yeah.
At Mantic, between us and staff members, we've all picked a company to paint up, and so even the ones that are not getting released until later on in the year, between us all, we've all picked one. And I've actually picked that Halfling one myself because I love that model so much. However, that's not the one that I play tested very much. I actually play tested the Force of the Abyss, the Bloody Cardinal. That's the one I was playing when I was play testing some stuff. So actually, I actually quite like how that plays.
The Bloody Cardinal is another really good model as well.
The model's fantastic. Yeah.
And Rob, you mentioned like 20 to 30 models on a side. You got a champion, and then how many units are in that company?
Well, let me go through the Goblins. You've got the champion, you've got the rabble, you've got some sharp sticks, and a mincer. Yeah, it's 4 units actually, and that's typically what it is for all of them. Apart from the Halflings, they've all got around 4 units. And again, that just makes it, as a hobby project, makes it really easy. And I've sort of mentioned this before. I always talk about there's this thing that the Christmas Day test, like Scale Extra, like a model railway. Can you open it on Christmas morning and by the afternoon you're playing? And for me, that's something that I think a lot of miniature games aspire to, but I genuinely think this does it. You can get this on Christmas morning. The rules aren't too overly complex, and by Christmas, maybe evening, maybe not the afternoon, because you've got to stop to eat, you could be playing this. And I think that's, for me, is something that's never quite been achieved. And I think the 2-player set is great, definitely achievable.
And in the box, I'm assuming you'll have kind of the same type of instructions that we see in the ambush boxes, but is there also going to be background story, fluff, that kind of stuff in the boxes themselves?
Yeah. So on the back of all the unit cards, there's actually a little bit of fluff about each unit, because like Andy was saying, they're all named. Like the Bloody Cardinals units, for example, or the Forces of the Abyss. They're all like sort of slight twists on religious sort of terms and all things like that. Yeah, and each one, when you turn it over, there's a paragraph or two about that unit that explains, who they are, what they do. So you've already got that flavor straight away. Before necessarily you've even read the background in the book, you've already got it. And that was a big thing from Ronnie, actually. He wants these characters to hopefully go on and get their own novels and that sort of stuff, or to be the star of campaigns. So having that character and having that sort of lore behind them was really important from day one.
What's interesting as well is in the rule book, there is background lore for each of the different champions that we'll be releasing this year. So even on day one, even though you don't necessarily know which month they're coming out, you will get to find out who the 9 champions are. You'll get to find out all of the background story about them. And so when they're up for release, you already kind of know whether this is a one that, I'm invested in this story. I want to know more. I want to play them, kind of thing.
If you look at the rest of the Mantic game offerings, especially the ones set in Panathor, they're sandboxes. Here, guys, here's the world. Here's some structure for playing your game. Go create your characters. Go create your army. And this puts it on its head in the sense that you don't have to do any of that. The narrative for these armies is preset. The units are preset. Just like people that are, they look at this insurmountable goal of painting 200 models for Kings of War. Also, there's some people that go, I really struggle with coming up with the army, whether it was list building or coming up with the background story. And so you've got this new avenue into Panathor where just pop the box open, put the models together, and just focus on playing the game and painting the models, rather than creating the list, looking for the most efficient uses. You don't do any of that.
Yeah.
Really different for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes I would think, Kings of War, that I'd lost before I'd even roll the dice because my list was so bad. I'd spend all this time theory crafting, and then I'd come to the table and I'd be like, I haven't got what I need to deal with flyers or that sort of stuff. It's not necessarily a gotcha moment, is it? But I think it's just one of those things. Is sometimes you spend all this time painting stuff, and then you might get tabled or whatever, or you realize you haven't got what you need. So I think, yeah, that was one big thing for this one, is that I think it takes a lot of that away. Hopefully a lot of those frustrations.
I think about, you want to create big tents, right? A big tent where all sorts of different types of play experiences are offered, welcoming to different players. So I love to see sort of within the world of Panathor of diversifying player experience. Because Rob, you bring up a good point of where it's like when you're building a list, people also want to come up with a theme. And maybe some people just aren't great in thinking about themes or whatever. So having this game system with a tight narrative focus, again, not only an entry point for gameplay wise, but also an entry point into learning more about Panathor. Because I think for many years we've dealt with people playing Kings of War, but they're not playing in Panathor, right? They're playing in their own world, or they're playing in the old world, or they love the Kings of War rule system, but they're not truly invested in Panathor itself. So to me, this is not only a great intro to Kings of War, but it sounds also a great intro into, the flavor and world of Panathor that we're trying to build. Does that resonate with you at all, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. I would kind of liken it a little bit to kind of D&D, like Dungeons and Dragons, and there are some people who want to kind of create their own worlds, and they want to be free to create their own characters and go off into kind of their imagination. And Kings of War can be like that, basically. I'll write whatever list I want. I'm creating their own backstory, and they're going to go off and fight in Panathor. And then for some people, there are the starter packs where they need their pre-built characters, and they need their pre-made stories and their narrative experience, and they just want to get in and play without having to kind of have that analysis paralysis of where the hell do I start with this thing. I think as we've been saying, that for some people, we'll start with champions, and that's as far as they'll go, and they'll be quite happy, and they'll have a lot of fun playing champions and playing in that kind of part of the Panethor world. And for some people, this will be the stepping stone that gets them into rank and flank gaming and then lets them kind of have more confidence to move beyond that into Ambush and into Kings of War as well.
How did you guys come up with the size? You said 42 inches by 24, I think.
It does sound slightly daft to say we measured dining room tables. We did sort of actually literally look at like the IKEA website and see how big a typical dining table is, particularly in the UK where we don't have a lot of space. Me and Matt sort of experimented with a few sort of sizes for the playing area until we finally settled on this one. So it does mean that we've knocked the speed down. For a lot of things, there's no speed 10 or 12 whatever units. They all typically tend to be around speed 5, speed 6 maybe for some of the really fast ones. So it does mean that turn 1 some of the units can get into combat, so it is quite quick. You've still got enough room to maneuver on that board, particularly when you've only got like 4 or 5 units. So you still get that sort of sense of rank and flank, sort of how important positioning is, and you can sort of lay the traps for people to move them in and that sort of stuff. After some sort of quite a lot of experimentation, we sort of settled on this size. It's a lovely size. I've really enjoyed playing this, and like Andy's saying, even with the terrain, you don't need a lot to make it feel quite claustrophobic on these tables because it is a small area.
You mentioned terrain, right? Like you're going to have some 2D and then also like a 3D upgrade. If people have terrain pieces they love from their Kings of War collection, can they use those in the game as well? Or do you suggest people use the terrain that comes in the box?
Yeah, so in the box, you get like a wood, you get some blocking terrain, and then you get some walls as well. It's suggested that some of them are called large and some of them are called small. So like a wood is large and a wall is small. And then what actually happens is before the game is you sort of roll off. One person's the attacker, one person's the defender. So before you start putting the models down, you actually place the terrain. The defender gets 3 pieces of terrain, so like 1 big and 2 small, and the attacker gets 1 big and 1 small. There's already sort of a little bit of tactics before you even start playing of, okay, well, where am I going to place this terrain to try and mess up my enemy? The reason for me wanting to sort of do it where you've got to place the terrain there and then is because when I was setting up tournaments at Mantic, I used to flipping agonize about where the terrain was meant to go, because you wanted it to be fair and all things like this. So actually, again, just take something out that's pain in the arse, to be honest with you, right? Is go, okay, well, actually, this is part of the game now. You sort of actually get to place it here and there, depending upon the scenario, depending upon what units you've got, and it becomes a little bit of the kind of pre-game tactics before you even sort of rolled any dice.
I love that idea, and the fact that maybe the gameplay is a little bit more streamlined, because that's the thing, right? You always have this push and pull between making a streamlined, easy to play game experience, but not wanting to remove strategic agency, right?
Yes.
You still want to have both. So here's a way where you can add in a little bit of strategic sprinkles, because a lot of people love doing player place terrain. I mean, we have some tournaments in Kings of War tournaments in the US where they do player place terrain. And you're exactly right. There's a whole another level of element of strategy involved, right? In placing terrain.
And again, you're talking there about the sprinkling, is that because it's a quick game to play, there's a small unit count, things like the additional faction orders or the additional like champions rules, you can do that because there's not too much, you're not sort of, again, like being overwhelmed by all these rules. So it does mean we've been able to dial up some other elements so that it's not just, basic move and attack. There are all these other elements, these other, I guess, like currencies that you're using to modify your units, like the faction orders. So yeah, it's been quite exciting actually to sort of, we started off by stripping everything back and then sort of rebuilding it and putting layers on as we were comfortable. Let's say, okay, we're comfortable with the size of the game. Right, we've done this. Now let's move on to something else.
Tell me a little bit about the units. I mean, they must have stats.
Yeah.
Are they similar stats to the way they are in Kings of War?
Typically, they are similar to Kings of War. So if you've played Kings of War, if you looked at the lists for, let's say, the Forces of Abyss, you would recognize some of it because they've got regeneration, for example. So you'd be like, okay. The problem is that obviously in Kings of War, and we sort of talked to this earlier on when we talked about balancing, is where things have got more rules or more attacks, obviously they're more points. That's how they're balanced. So in this one, I think particularly like the Twilight Kin, for example, some units had lots of rules, but they were expensive. So we did have to sort of like strip out some of the rules to make sure they were more balanced against other ones. So There are definitely similarities, and you will kind of recognize them if you've played Kings of War. There's a couple of new rules, like a new special abilities, but generally that's sort of more of the flavor is through the faction orders and through the champions, I'd say.
The DNA of the game is going to feel familiar.
Yes.
Maybe it's something new, but if you've played Kings, or if you start with champions and then move to Ambusher Kings, it's going to be the same thing, right? There's going to be these sort of the chromosomes, or like I said, the DNA of the game is going to feel familiar from step to step to step.
It sort of reminds me of Firefight, second edition came out. If someone had started with Dead Zone, actually when they progressed to Firefight, there was a lot of similar terms. It was using D8s and that sort of stuff. So you were immediately comfortable, although there were a lot of different rules, you were sort of comfortable with the basics, and then you could go on top. And I think that's for champions. You know, you get in, you play, you're used to the D6, you're used to things like, okay, if I get a flank, I roll more dice, and that kind of thing. And then obviously that's when you start layering up the rules for Kings of War.
You know, obviously we have all these awesome new champions models for the actual champions themselves coming out, which I'm totally excited for. And the great things in Kings of War, right? You can start using these models right away, I imagine, just representing something else. But since you are building such a rich narrative for these characters, I think you touched on it a little bit of Ronnie sort of seeing his vision of where these characters go. Down the road, is there thought of maybe having these characters also show up in Kings of War, having a more traditional Kings of War stat line?
That is definitely the plan, is that these will appear into Kings of War, and that people will sort of, you know, they'll fall in love with those particular characters, and those named characters will kind of, you know, they'll have their own life beyond champions as well.
You got these bespoke units. We already have unique units in Kings of War. I mean, maybe we can get rules for the units as well.
Everything is basically plastics as well. There's nothing else. There's no other kind of units in there. Some of those plastics already exist, but you're right in terms of they've all got unique names. It's like a, you know, like a named band that, if you like, that comes along with that champion.
I guess potentially these could become like formations, I guess is what you're asking, Rob, potentially. I mean, I don't know about that. You know, they wouldn't let me near. They never would let me near Kings of War when I was at Mantic, so they won't let me near it now.
They want people that know how to play the game. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, that's the problem, right? Yeah.
Or everything turns green when you're around.
Yeah, all of a sudden all the goblins have got, you know, 3+ melee and all that sort of stuff. Champions is almost like that zoomed down. You know, you imagine this is a huge battle, and actually sort of this could be one element of that battle where the champions are sort of going in and leading their units. So I definitely think that they could potentially have their own formations, and that could go in there, which would be a really nice touch actually to sort of bring them across.
This is Countercharge, your podcast for all things Kings of War.
The two sides of it is, one is this is not meant to kind of like to drag Kings of War players away from playing Kings of War, and this is meant to be a standalone game in its own right as well. As I said before, some people will just play champions and never expand beyond that. This really is, it's that really accessible first step into rank and flank gaming for people that have seen rank and flank gaming but have been put off by big scale games. And it really is that initial step into the world of Panethor and into bringing people through the ranks into big scale Kings of War in the future as well.
And I just think about it, Rob and I talk about this a lot. I think that the health of a game system or a game world is not only determined by who's playing it, where they're playing it, but we got to get Kings of War and Mantic into stores. So when I'm thinking about, like, in my local store, trying to get them to carry Kings of War, they're like, wait a minute, how many boxes? How many models? How much shelf space do I have to give? Whereas the idea of going to my local store and saying, hey guys, here's the entry game. It's preset. Once someone buys the Goblin Company, they're completely done. Get a couple of each of the factions. I'll come run some demos. We'll get a league going. It also sounds accessible not only for the player, but maybe accessible for I call it like the Mantic Curious store that maybe is not carrying Mantic stuff, but maybe speak to that, Andy, of is this maybe a possible entry for stores as well?
100%. I mean, it's something we're very much aware of, that Kings of War, whilst it is a fantastic game and has a great model range, it's sometimes confusing. What do I stock? What do my customers want? Do I get one of every mega army? Do I only stock 2-player sets? It's a difficult kind of selling at that point. Kings of War Champions is that thing where it's not a huge range of stuff. People don't need to kind of have to expand beyond their initial boxes. A store can have a 2-player set, and then every month when there's a new release, they can stock the new faction that comes in that month. And It's designed around small play spaces. So all those stores that have card gaming tables, absolutely this will fit on them. You can get more people playing. It becomes visible in store. What's that cool game you're playing? Oh, you only need one box and you can come and play, kind of thing. It's that recruitment tool. It's that thing that stores can understand. There's a very obvious way to be able to sell it to a customer without having to say, oh, well, there's 25, 30 different units you can choose from. You build your own, but we don't sell this. You get this direct. It takes away all of that stuff for stores. And it becomes a much easier sell-through of, this is the range, have at it kind of thing. You don't need to stock 40 different SKUs, if you like.
As a proponent of Mantic Games, it's something easy for me to talk to a store owner about. It's something that I can explain to them. They get it. A lot of game systems, they're sort of, whether it's Combat Patrol or the AOS version, right, where it's everything is what it is in the box. You don't add or take away anything. We were talking about collectible card games. It's like a pre-constructed deck, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to get this deck, which has this play style, and then I'm going to get this deck, which has this play style. I think gamers can really wrap their head around that.
It also at the price range as well, like for an individual company box, it's at that accessible price range that the store owner isn't too worried about having them on the shelf, and it's the kind of price where people are almost impulse purchasing. Oh, I'll have one of them. I'll give it a try, kind of thing. I don't have to buy in at $90, $100 for a starter army box that I then have to expand on.
Price points wise, what are we looking at?
You know what? I've got some prices in front of me, but I'm not sure that they're the latest prices. But the last time I checked, I think a company box is around $55.
Yeah, so not a huge investment.
So I think, like I say, that might be subject to change and stuff. But when we were talking about it, it was going to be around that price. That was where we were aiming at. It's not the kind of thing where, like I say, where a store owner is having to sink a lot of retail money into kind of having to stock in a full range of different armies and things.
Well, let's kind of recap what's coming out. So you mentioned the Faith and Fury 2-player starter set with Basilean and Force of the Abyss.
That's right.
Highlight to me, I heard, was plastic Basilean Cavalry.
They are coming out in that 2-player set, but they will also be coming out as a standalone release for Kings of War as well around the same time. So outside of Champions, if you're just a Basilean player and you want to get that cavalry, it will absolutely be coming out around the same time as well. And we're just, I think in the next week or so, we'll be starting to kind of talk about that. That 2-player set, a couple of different company boxes, the Northern Alliance and the Twilight Kin one with Lathiel Voidhawk and Jordan Tallinson there. Rulebook and token set, a deluxe 3D terrain set, and then the deluxe neoprene game and mats as well. So that's all at launch.
And that's launch is going to be in April, pre-orders soon.
Pre-orders, I think, are going to be the week of Adepticon. I think pre-orders are going to be starting up, so not too long. And they'll be shipping end of April. You'll be able to get them into your hands, so not too long to wait.
And I really feel bad that neither one of you fine gentlemen will be at Adepticon, because we would love to have a demo. But is there going to be some Kings of War champions at Adepticon?
There is going to be some Kings of War champions demos at Adepticon. Yeah, that's going to be the kind of world first place to be able to get your demos, be able to get some demos at Adepticon, and of course they'll be up for pre-order at that point, and you won't have long to wait. They'll be in stores the month after.
The more you talk about it, the more excited I'm getting.
Sounding really cool. Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break, and on the other side, we'll come back and we'll wrap up the show. We'll be right back.
I'm Ronnie from Mantic Games, and you're listening to Countercharge.
And we are back. So one thing we love to do in our show, especially when we do army reviews or we talk about game systems or whatever, I'm a big fan of the elevator pitch, right? In that, how many times are you standing next to someone in a game store and they're looking at the same product as you or whatever, and they're like, oh, you play that game? What do you like about it? It's always a good idea, I think, when you're trying to grow community to sort of have that. So I would love, Rob, have you riffed on first. If we were stuck in an elevator and you were trying to get me to play Kings of War Champions, what's sort of your elevator pitch?
If I was stuck in a lift with someone, obviously once I bored them to death about goblins and then we came on to champions, I would say that if you've ever been war game curious and you've always wanted a game that you could play really quickly, has simple rules, has great miniatures, and is narrative driven with great characters, then this is really the game for you. This is the game that is easy to get into, just great fun. Actually, that's the main thing. It's a really fun game to play with, like fun little variations and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd just say if you want a fun war game, it doesn't take ages to play, then this is the one for you.
Same question to you, Andy.
I guess I've briefly touched on it before, but I guess it's one of those things. If you're a lover of fantasy And for whatever reason, you've bounced off rank and flank gaming in the past. It's never been, you've never found it quite accessible. It's been a little bit beyond your reach in terms of time or commitment, or maybe even brain space sometimes for all of the things you need to do it. Kings of War Champions sort of ticks all of those boxes that you might have bounced off things in the past. I think the fact that it plays on a small play area, low investment in terms of hobby like time, it's low investment in terms of physical kind of funds as well, hobby funds. It gives you the feel of a real big battle rank and flank game, but in a really fast sort of self-contained game system.
Well, Rob, I'm thinking Friday Night Champions at Kings of Memphis.
100%. Because, I mean, ours is in June. They get their boxes in April. Plenty of time to get their stuff built.
I'll give you a little exclusive then. I think by June, you might even have the Night Stalkers as well.
Oh, man.
There you go.
At that point, that'd be 5 factions then, right?
There'll be 5 by June. Yeah, that's right.
Kings of War Masters in July. I think we're going to take a look because we're hoping at Masters this year we have enough space that we're going to have a couple of firefight tables up the whole weekend. We'll get a couple of champions tables up too. Thanks so much, guys, for coming on. It's a real pleasure to have you. You know, Andy, you're always welcome on the show. Rob, it's good to have you on after a little hiatus. And it's cool that, you know, you've moved on in your career. You sort of have grown your butterfly wings and are flying in the sky.
Is that what you're trying to say? He's an adult?
Well, I mean, just this, like, you know,
I've got a proper job, as my mum and dad would say, yeah.
You still can stay connected to the friendships and relationships you built at Mantic and also to the world that you love. It just warms my heart to hear that you were back. You know, you never burn bridges in life, right? Because you never know who you're going to work with, when you're going to work with them again. So I think it's exciting to just have you back in the family.
Thanks, Jeremy. I mean, I've always, you know, one of the things I loved when I was at Mantic was writing all the, obviously the blogs, but also writing stuff for the campaigns and the lore. You know, I got to do a bit of the background. For me, this was a really great opportunity to sort of merge those two things together. I love writing the lore, and I really enjoyed coming up with the champions' backgrounds. You know, because obviously I know a lot about the lore, so I could tie things into like other bits that have happened in the past. So if you're familiar with Kings of War, you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember when that happened in the Forces of the Abyss campaign, or oh, I recognize that name. Who's this? This, for me, it was a really great opportunity to merge those two things together. Yeah, so I've loved it. And yeah, I mean, there was no way Ronnie was going to let me leave. He was always going to try and get me back somehow. So yeah, it's been great. So it's really nice. And it's nice to be on, you know, Countercharge again and talking to you guys.
Well, one of the best things, and I think it keeps a lot of people playing Mantic games, not only the models or the rules or whatever, it's the community and the relationships we build. You know, here we are at episode 700 and something. That would not be possible if the community wasn't there, if the appetite wasn't there, if the desire to find friends and fellowship wasn't there. And I just have always felt that that is part of the vision, mission, values of Mantic. And it's been a part of vision, mission, values of our show, right? Is how do we create these communities? Because in the end, you can't play miniature war games with yourself, right? I mean, you could, but it ain't no fun.
It's a big part of what we do. I mean, it's part of the reason I ended up working at Mantic is because the community was, you know, was such a big draw for me as well, and how I found Mantic games and how I got involved even before I started working there. It's another reason why games like Champions exist. We want that onboarding process. We want to bring new eyes to it. Like Halo's done a good thing, bringing people to Mantic. How do we bring people to Kings of War? And this is just another step on that journey.
I appreciate you guys coming on the show and chatting with us all about Kings of War Champions, and we're really excited about the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, that's going to do us tonight. Until next time, keep countercharging.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Countercharge. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at counterchargepodcast@gmail.com, on Twitter at countercharge15, or by commenting on the Countercharge Kings of War Podcast Facebook group. If you enjoy the show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Until next time, keep countercharging. Music is a composition of Kevin MacLeod and is licensed under Creative Commons.